So thankful here today. We've on leadership across the table. We've got Judge Gary McKenzie. He's a circuit court judge, specifically the criminal court judge here in the Greater 13th Judicial District.
Correct.
And how many years in are you?
So I am. I was elected in 2014. And first off, thanks for having me. I really am honored to be called in here and appreciate it. But so I was elected in 2014. So let's see, we're in 24. So I'm over 10 years in, right? It seems like just yesterday whenever I was elected. So
a lot of our audience, follows kind of the legal industry and is aware of some of our guests that are non-legal related. A lot of people know you. You've been obviously in office for 10 years, but I think people would find it really interesting to know kind of the road to becoming a judge, both your desire to be on the bench and also how it happened, kind of what you did before you became a judge and kind of that backstory.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was actually born and raised in southeast Tennessee, outside of Chattanooga, in a little bitty county called Meigs County, Tennessee, which is Decatur, which is approximately, well, at the time I was living there, it's about 7,000 or 8,000 people. And I always, I had family members that were in law enforcement. So I always was sort of drawn to the idea of justice and the law. And so, I go to college to get a degree in criminal justice. At that point, I kind of thought maybe law enforcement was what I was interested in, and then maybe even like federal, like FBI or something of that nature. Yeah. Well, one of the best decisions I probably made in my whole life was to come to Tennessee Tech, and that brought me to Cookeville.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best decisions for a number of reasons. One is I fell in love with Cookeville, the Upper Cumberland area. Number two, I fell in love with a young lady named Amy Hatton at the time, who I later married, and now we have 3 children. Yeah, we were at Tech together. Okay. So I met her at Tech, which was wonderful. And, so that comes from that decision as well. Well, after getting my degree at that time to become a FBI agent, you needed one of three things. And back then it was be an accountant, go to law school, be a lawyer, or have 4 years experience in law enforcement. And
whatever
I thought,
that may be, detective work,
correct.
Patrol,
patrol or whatever it may be. And I thought, well, why don't I just go ahead and go to law school? I could do that in 3 years. Yeah. And of course, during the law school part of that, I learned what it was to be a prosecutor, right? And so I came back and was fortunate enough to have got a job offer with the district attorney's office in 2000. And I moved back here with Amy. Of course, we had gotten married there around in between my second and third year of law school. So we moved back here to start our family because I knew I wanted a family in the Upper Cumberland after living here and going through college.
Yeah.
And so, and then I went through, became a prosecutor, got to work with some great people, retired Judge David Patterson, who at that time was a prosecutor in the same office that I'd got hired into, and he was a big influence on me. And then began my career. Well, I really had a passion for justice, and it's just something that kind of drove me into this direction. And then I got to watch Leon Burns, who was the judge at that time, Criminal Court Part 1, who was a wonderful judge. I mean, he was, if you look up judge in the dictionary, as they say, there's a picture of him. He was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, and they did it for me.
Oh, man, and such an influence on me, both before and even to this day. We still have conversations. And so I knew, I was thinking 14 years in as a prosecutor, and I had done almost everything from trying DUI cases to first-degree murders and handling death penalty cases. And I knew when he had announced that he was going to retire, then setting judge David Patterson came to me and asked me to consider to run. And that was pretty much it. I decided, okay, I'm going to do this.
And then because not every prosecutor or attorney, right? You can be any type of attorney to run for judge. A lot of our criminal court judges come from a prosecutorial background. Why? Because, they've been operating in that system for years. And are oftentimes the best candidates for it.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants the pressure and the temperament and honestly just the gravity that comes with that position. I think the judiciary in general is kind of cloistered, and a lot of Americans understand the court system and a little bit about the legal system, but the judiciary, one of our three branches of our government, is a little bit, I feel like, not secretive, but just not as well understood. And it's really important to know that in Tennessee at the trial level, you run and you are elected.
That's correct.
As a judge.
Yeah,
and can you talk a little bit about why you believe that is the better way to select someone to serve in the judiciary versus like an appointment from a governor,
Yeah.
or like on the federal side, the president elects trial judges?
Sure. So the way we're set up on the trial judge level, we are elected and we have an 8-year term. So it's a lengthy term for each election. So we kind of, the way that the Tennessee system works, I think an elected official should answer to the electorate, to the voters, right? Because that's what we are, being a republic and a democratic republic, and individuals get to choose their representatives and their leaders, and which is the way it should be. But at the same time, you want to make sure that your judiciary is also free of politics, or at least as free from politics as you can be, so that the judge can get up there and make the decision and not worry about any ramifications from a political standpoint. And so we kind of married both of those things together. We're going to we answer to the public, but at the same time, our term is long enough that we're not constantly running for office. It's not like a correct, like a representative that runs, every 2 years. And so, now you could do an appointment system, and I appreciate that. I mean, I understand you could say once you're appointed for life or a term, then maybe you're not, held accountable to politics. But you would be kidding yourself to say that appointment isn't handed out, with politics in mind.
It's a different level of politics.
It just is.
And I'm curious to know your viewpoint, Judge, if you have one. I clerked in our Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals while I was a summer in law school. I got to know some of the appellate process there. And of course, they are appointed by our government.
They are.
And there's, again, arguments on both sides.
They are.
I think the older I get, and especially of our society just going through this most recent election this week, there's pros and cons to both arguments, but having our judiciary have to run a transparent campaign and have some level of accountability to the electorate, in my opinion, and maybe even at the appellate level, I think the benefits outweigh the negatives. And even at the appellate level, what I've seen, and I don't know I can't list off every single judge, but you're seeing DOJ, federal bureaucrats be appointed by our governor at the both civil court of appeals and the court of criminal appeals. Not that they are not fine and excellent lawyers. I think some of the fear that I have is that we're not really having Tennesseans that either can relate to or really are accountable to the electorate. We're getting further federal employees that do a rotate in the Solicitor General's office or the DOJ and on our appellate courts. And I think the counter argument is, well, they have a lot of a very, very good experience and they're the best for the job. What is your opinion at the appellate level in our state?
Well, in our state, I mean, the one thing you have to always remember is that even though they are appointed, there's a retention election every 8 years. So they are answerable to the public. Now, I would say, the chances of an appellate judge being booted off at a retention election is relatively low, but there still is a little bit of transparency there in the sense of, the general public, an informed electorate is the most important thing, right? And so if the people want to really do their research to find out who it is that's being appointed to those positions, it's there, and they can, and so they still are held to answer to the public. I can speak really with the Criminal Court of Appeals, obviously, or the Court of Criminal Appeals, as we call it, more because I'm a criminal court judge, right? So I follow that.
A little above the trial.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, I feel real satisfied with that, and I don't just say that because they grade my papers, right? That's what we say. They grade my papers. I don't just say that because of that. I really don't. I know several of the individuals that have been appointed recently. Kyle Hickson, for example, was recently appointed to the Eastern District Court of Criminal Appeals. He is born and raised in Crossville, Tennessee. Know his parents, knew him at the time he was in law school and watched his career. And I think he is actually a really good representative of this Upper Cumberland area as well that's found his way up there. So,
born and raised here, from here.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's other stories like that for other appellate level judges that have went to that, to have got that rose up and been appointed to those positions. So, I feel fairly satisfied with that. Now, federal system's obviously a little bit different, and maybe you see more politics and what you're suggesting with, maybe a bureaucratic individual that ends up in these positions. I think that might play out a little more on the federal level that way. I do think that the state, there's still, I think the individuals that are coming up
have ties to their districts.
I do think so. Yeah, I do think so. So I'm pretty satisfied
with the system.
I am. Yeah, I am. I might disagree. Obviously, I may disagree on some decisions maybe that the committee or the governor might make in appointments across the state. But by and large, I think it does a decent job of trying to get a good representation of the people of our state.
And it really is so important for our viewers to get out and vote in our local elections. As attorneys, it is true that we have certain pockets in our state. Sometimes we laugh, and some lawyers will refer to those as constitutional free zones and things and argue about that. But the bottom line is our local judges matter greatly. And
very much.
Everybody is universally on both sides of the bar have been pleased with your rulings. And why? Because you read the motions, you read briefs, you come prepared, and that's what people expect out of our judges, and that's not always the case.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't think the public realizes. I totally agree with what you're saying. I don't think the public realizes just how important when you go every 8 years to elect your judiciary candidates, and that's not just the judges included, but you're also electing the public defender and the district attorney.
Absolutely.
And I mean, those are incredibly important elections because those individuals will have a direct effect day-to-day lives of the citizens of these 7 counties that we're in. General Bryant Dunaway's elected district attorney came in 14 when I did, and then Craig Fickling, the elected public defender, came in when I did. And what has been if only people knew the discourse prior to that election. In 14, one of the good things that happened is when the 3 of us were elected at that time frame, we had known each other as attorneys and kind of grew up together as attorneys. Yeah. And we have such a good working relationship that we're able to sit down at tables. And listen, Craig and Bryant will argue and argue and argue. But at the end of the day, they both have in mind the benefit of the justice system. And so do I. And so I think since 14, we've been able to really work on the efficiency of the system and come together and put our differences aside and be able to move the system forward. You elect individuals in those positions or in my position or any judge's position who maybe don't have that care for the system, don't care about reading briefs, don't care about, they'd rather just wear the robe so that everybody when they walk in has to stand up. I mean, I would suggest if that's the reason why you want to be a judge, then you're not suited for that role. You elect a dysfunction in one of those positions and see what happens in your community.
Those 3 positions, the criminal court judge, our local elected DA every 8 years, and the public defender, are the leadership of our justice system in this district.
Yeah, in the criminal justice system, absolutely. Yeah. And it's incredibly important. And I think we've had a really good run so far. And listen, there's problems in the system. And as you know, I mean, when you're in it, you see them, I see them. We don't all have the answers, and my door is always open for any citizen or attorney or whoever it may be that wants to come by and have a cup of coffee and talk about it because, they may have a great idea.
Which brings me to truth in sentencing.
Sure.
I actually have to admit, I am somewhat ignorant since I've stepped out of criminal defense and public defense. Can you kind of just, in layperson's terms, kind of show the public? Once again, a lot of people don't interact with the justice system. They don't know.
No, they don't.
Can you kind of lay out what that is, why, the benefits of it, and
then maybe what the burdens are, right?
And maybe some burdens.
Yeah. So historically, Tennessee's sentencing guidelines up until recently have been almost every criminal offense that you were convicted of had what we called a percentage of parole eligibility in it, which would mean that if I gave you, for example, if you are convicted of a Class C felony, that's the middle of the road, we have different ranges of punishment, and depending on how many prior felonies, that would give you an idea of what the window of what your sentence might be. So if you have one prior felony to 0 to 1, you're in range 1, you're looking at 3 to 6 years. Of that 3 to 6 years, you're looking at a 30% parole eligibility. So if I was to sentence somebody, let's say, to 3 years, and the public reads that in the paper, then after 30% of it, they parole out, and which that's the parole board. That's nothing that I have to do. Once I sentence them, I'm done with them. Well, the parole board comes in, they parole them out after about 9 months to a year, which is that 30, and they're eligible for it, and they get paroled out, and the general public's like, well, I don't understand. He got 3 years, and now I'm seeing the person out just a year into it. So there's confusion, and so the 3 years is not necessarily 3 years. The idea behind truth in sentencing is let's be honest about what it is the sentence we're going to give them, so that the public can have faith in when there is a sentence handed down that we mean what we say, right? Well, and so there's your benefits to truth in sentencing, and on top of that, there's benefits to truth in sentencing when you're talking about violent offenders, individuals that need to be removed from society, right? Yeah. And so you want them to serve the sentence that's been handed down. Well,
for instance, obviously, violent crime, sexual
correct.
Crime, rape, child
that's
rape,
right.
all those
that's
things,
correct.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, so historically, we had that percent eligibility for parole. Now, on crimes like first-degree murder, it was 100% sentence. On crimes like rape, it was 100% sentence. But many crimes like aggravated burglary, even aggravated assault, certain types of crimes like that were still that percentage. There's been a movement here recently to go to truth in sentencing, and not all, we're not completely truth in sentencing at this point. So if you still commit a theft, for example, that's over $10,000 and you end up in that C felony range, and I give you 3 years, you're still going to be parole eligible after 30% of it, right? But what we have done is we've now moved further, and we've said, okay, let's apply that truth in sentencing in things like home invasions, right? Like aggravated burglary.
Yeah.
Like what about an aggravated assault where there's serious bodily injury or someone's using a deadly weapon? And so we've moved to incorporate more of those violent crimes or those property type crimes that involve some violence when we talk about breaking into a home. And so there's been a move to do that. And so I think we're trying to balance that.
That's not currently been passed. That is not the current framework under those property crimes right now.
No, we're not. Yeah, the property crimes are sort of left to where they were.
Okay.
But the crimes that have been included in truth in sentencing are things like aggravated assault now.
Okay.
Aggravated burglary
so
now.
They did grab some of those more.
Correct, they did. And that, for example, attempted first degree murder. Believe it or not, attempted first degree murder used to be a 30% release eligibility.
Gotcha. Yeah.
They've included those types of things. They've increased some of the punishment on obviously some types of sexual related crimes that involve children or rape or things of those nature. So they've stiffened the penalties on those, which I think we needed. So they're trying to strike that balance there because the burden of a truth in sentencing obviously is you could end up where your prison is overpopulated, right? So I mean, it's
practicalities that the public doesn't even understand.
Correct.
Those are real problems.
Yeah.
We have to come up with solutions.
Yeah, and I think the legislature has done a really good job in saying, okay, these are the crimes that if there's a certain type of offender that may be eligible for parole and there's low downside to some release, maybe, it is that type of property offense, maybe they can get out, maybe they can help pay restitution, things of this nature, versus we want those individuals that need to be in the prison system. We want to make sure we've got room in the prison system for those offenders who need to be removed from society, right? That's the balance they're trying to strike. I think they've done a wonderful job in that.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how any reasonable, logical citizen is going to say that we should not have those types of truthful and transparent sentences for those serious types of
Sure,
crimes,
absolutely.
Right? So,
yeah, absolutely.
Which kind of going to caveat on kind of this balancing act between confinement and populations and this discussion around our prison system and our local jail system is addiction and drug crimes. Now again, your job is to implement the law as a judge, right? You're not in the legislature, but
that's right.
I know when I was in public defense, right, I guess 18 months to 2 years, I was a public defender.
That's right.
And a lot of our audience may not know that actually.
Yes.
And that was such an amazing experience to interact with the public. Of course, we're both in the military. I've worked at Kroger. I mean, I've had jobs of public service.
Absolutely.
But not with people that are really on the margins and on the ropes sometimes in society.
Yeah.
Drugs are a huge problem.
It's bad. Yeah, no, it's really bad.
It is so bad. And I did
is.
not realize how bad it was until it was my job to represent individuals with serious addictions to methamphetamine and opiate addictions. Can you talk a little bit about the addiction court or the drug court rather? How is that operated? How has it been improved over the years here in the 13th?
Yeah, so each there are several different recovery courts that spread out through the 13th. So the 13th district has 7 counties, and there are several recovery type courts that are working on the individual county basis. And then there's the 13th drug court that was established back in 2011 that covers all 7 counties. And the idea behind all of them is because, as you know, in your time as a public defender, as assistant public defender, as you know, most all of our criminal offenses the vast majority have an addiction element to them, right? And so the idea would be is if we can take those individuals that are nonviolent offenders, where there is little risk of any type of violence or things of that nature, we can take that individual who was productive up to the point where they began their addiction, and we can address that addiction and have them overcome it. And then, that saves that money that we might spend on a prison sentence for them, so that we can put that aggravated assault and that individual in their place in the prison system, right? So that's the idea behind it. The other thing is the art recovery court is based off of a long-term treatment type option. So, for example, in our 13th recovery court, you end up coming into it, more likely than not, you're going to assess into long-term treatment. So we have long-term treatment facilities in Nashville and outside the prison in Morgan County Regional Prison Complex. You're going to do about 12 to 14 months inpatient locked in.
There.
Correct. You're going to do 12 to 14 months in there, which conversely is probably about as much time as you would do in a nonviolent 30% sentence.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not really an easy way out. Then you come out to supervised probation by Department of Corrections, where it's very intensive. You're coming to court to see me almost every other week. And so we've had great success with those people in being able to move them from that scenario out into the public where they're paying taxes, right, and they're productive members. And so I think that's one of the great benefits of that recovery court.
Are you seeing people successfully, a high percentage of folks that are able to get clean from it? Or
we see a high percentage, but I guess it depends on what you define as high percentage. So what's unfortunate is, we've been fortunate enough to be somewhere near that 70% or higher success rate, which is a good thing. Now, there's no downside to the recovery court also, because if the individual does not complete the program, if they violate or they were to not successfully complete the inpatient, then they go serve their prison sentence, right?
Right.
So, we're certainly not everybody that gets in the program is going to successfully complete it. However, I think at one of our most recent graduations that we had, the taxpayer savings for the individuals who graduated was somewhere close to the $600,000, $700,000 range worth of sentences there for those individuals that graduated. So there's some benefit on the tax dollar too, right? And for those that are concerned about that, we save more money than is spent on the program. Because my salary is included, the DAs, the PDs, you're paying me no matter what anyway, right? So there's no extra salary included in that other than just the staff. And you got the Department of Corrections probation officer, it's getting paid as well by the state no matter what. So little cost, great savings, right? The most difficult part of that is just determining who gets in there and who doesn't.
Gotcha. That sounds like the downside is very little of this drug court program across our state. And it's also redemption, which is part of our Christian ethic and development of our legal system. And again, from a practical standpoint, we've got to have a society, we've got to have a way that we can fund this in a practical manner. And the upside's dramatic for those that can.
I agree.
We interviewed Michael Leland on our previous show. Severe addiction with alcohol. Our industry, as we know, has lots of addictions. So
yes,
it's
absolutely.
just so vicious in its ability to, In my reserve unit this year, we just had another soldier, overdose last week. Someone just took their life in my unit, and it does not care about your socioeconomic background, your family.
No, it does not.
Addiction
that is
correct.
correct.
Problem. So that's great to hear that our public servants are involved in the fight.
And it's unfortunate, of course, as you said, we both have experience being in the military, and it's unfortunate I saw that as well, is that the addiction issues, which is the reason why we started the Veterans Treatment Court in 14 whenever I was elected, because it was important to me. If anybody deserves a second chance, it's those individuals that wore the uniform, right? And all the things. And the Army is, you're an Army man as myself. Happens to be my favorite branch, but I'm a little...
roll this year in football.
I know, right? It's great. But I'm a little biased. But the Army's really, really good at going and breaking things, and not so good at putting things back together, right? I mean, if there's a critique of the Army, and I think they're trying to address that, I really do. But programs like what we have, we do see a lot of alcohol abuse and addiction issues from those individuals who have served and coming back from deployments, and so. We're designed to kind of spot those people out and give them that opportunity to become a productive citizen again. And we do. We have really good success with that program as well.
Kind of as we close our interview, one of the things I like to talk on a little bit is just politics. There are certain public servants that run without a party affiliation, and I think again, part of one thing I hope the audience sees today is there are arguments for everything. What we have to do in governance is come up with the best public process, and you have ran and have been elected as a Republican, right? And also on this
last go around,
and I think what the public has seen over the last 4 years, we've had a front row seats in places like Minnesota and of course California and other more progressive states. And in our experiment that we call the democracy, our states have wide latitude to legislate on issues like drugs and public health and everything else. And there is obviously a very stark difference between crime, violent crime, and those things in states like Tennessee. And I'm just curious, your judicial philosophy as a conservative, as a Republican, on how you view your job as an independent, judicial officer, on kind of why our system is better here versus maybe a counterpart, maybe in a place like California or New York, and why our ideas are flourishing here versus those states.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that I think is really important about Tennessee and Tennessee's judiciary is that I think, and it's not necessarily just germane to Tennessee, but we have an incredible group of people that are serving in the judiciary who have a lot of pride in their state, and they want to see their state succeed and do well. And certainly, from you'll have in the judiciary on the trial court level, you run as party. But I mean, I think that Tennessee has a law and order type approach, but at the same time, it does balance that with an understanding that there are certain individuals, as we just talked about, that you might be able to divert from that, prison and that framework for saving, so that we can make sure that we do punish the individuals that need to be punished, and those individuals need to be put in prison and spend time in incarceration. So I think we've got a really good balanced approach, and I think if you lean too far in one direction or the other in the court system, you're going to end up with some issues. And I think we strike a really good balance, but I do think also that individuals need to have faith in their system, and they need to understand that their system's there, and it's not always going to work, right? But I do think our philosophy in Tennessee kind of strikes that balance well and sends that message, like truth in sentencing, is that there are certain things that we're not going to tolerate in a civilized society, and that there's going to be a level of personal responsibility. You get away from, you have a society that doesn't have any sense of personal responsibility, and you're going to lean more towards chaos, right? And I think that we strike that good balance that keeps us in line, and I think that's maybe why you're seeing less and less certain issues in the state of Tennessee, as you might see in other states.
A very good answer. That's why you're a judge. It's just that because it's never that easy, and that's what I'm hoping that Thank you so much again for coming on here and being transparent. That a lot of the public is understanding, but really needs to kind of hear that, because it's not always just so black and white. We want to innovate and come to a just approach in the right way. I think the last thing I'd like to ask you is, I know you have been a big, proponent and have read about, the late Antonin Scalia, his approach with, this district interpretation, the originalist approach. I recently just finished retired Stephen Breyer's book. Very good book to kind of make me, as more of a conservative, to look at judicial interpretation from another point of view at the highest level when they're looking at making decisions. Actually, just reaffirm my approach to how the judiciary should look at the law. And of course, we're at the trial level, but kind of let the public know a little bit into whenever you're getting motions filed or briefs on maybe a Fourth Amendment issue or something like that, on how you view your role as a judge, so that you can come to a just ruling. Yeah.
So I can't necessarily speak on what I would rule, but here's what I can speak on is that, there are different judicial philosophies in how you would interpret the law, and a textualist or an originalist, if you will, which is Justice Scalia and individuals that prescribe to that type of belief, is that you take the law as written and you try to apply the common meaning of the terms in the law that existed at the time the law was written, and that you sort of approach it in that way. Now, you can have one that's a living constitutionalist, right, or a framework constitutionalist, and that's going to be a little more on the left-hand side, right? And they're going to take a look at it and say, okay, so this is what it's written, but let's try to interpret that in today's world, and let's try to look more towards the underlying intent, and let's try to get justice, even if we have to stretch some of these terms to some degree, or at least what they might determine justice to be, right? So you got more room there to do that. It's a living, breathing document. And obviously there's critique on each side that are valid sides. The living constitutionalists or the framework constitutionalists, it would be, at what point have you stretched this language that you no longer actually have this constitutional amendment, right? That's the danger on that side. And then one might say that the textualist is, well, you're interpreting it so strictly, but the world is evolving and changing as we go. And so that would be the critique on that. It seems to me that the law, it is not my job to write the law. I am not, if I wanted to write law, then I'm in the wrong branch of government, right? My job is to take it, interpret it, and apply it as it's written, because, again, I don't create law, right? So, judicial activism is a critique of, obviously, that social or that framework constitutionalist. But, that's why we have legislatures. That's why we have the separation of powers. So, again, it goes back to the person that's going to pull the trigger and elect somebody. That's why it would be good for them to have an understanding. What is the philosophy of this person? Look at their body of work and know and have an understanding, because that's who you're electing. That will be interpreting this.
That will be. And reading Justice Breyer, who's more on the, I guess what you're calling the constitutionalist framework approach. He made some really good arguments in looking at how a lot of these decisions from the strict textualist approach, and of course he's written it from his vantage point, but how it would come up with some bizarre outcomes whenever they're looking at, statute or this administrative policy. But I think that I know, here we go, we're going to touch on this, but just look at the most recent Dobbs decision. Not talking about your work or the local level, but at the federal level, everyone's focused on the Supreme Court, as we should be. When you take it to the extreme in how we interpret the Constitution, our core contract as a society, and then we have people making social policy and law from that branch, we're not going to make it as a pluralistic society. Whether we have pro-choice, or you're pro-life, or there's a lot in between, it's very messy. But like on this most recent election, I think 3 states struck down some pro-choice legislation in Florida. I think Nebraska, one other state, and there was 5 or 6 other states that landed somewhere in the middle. Correct. And I think the bottom line here is, it's hurtful for certain citizens depending on what states we're in, but we've got to allow our legislators to work, and that could take more time, and it could be somewhat painful. That if we continue to go down the road, I guess, on the constitutionalist framework, it does matter, because eventually you get to our federal system. And is that why you kind of lean more on the textualist side?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the thing is, I think, for example, there's a real misunderstanding of the Dobbs decision by the general public at large, in the sense of, that decision came out and banned abortion and struck it down. That is not true in the least, right? What it did was, it said, we're going to return this issue to the states, and it's that each individual, again, we are a democratic republic, and the idea to keep this country together was that not every state or region of this state, this is a vast country, very vast, and there's going to be different areas, different values, different philosophies that spread out this land of ours. And if you get to a place that you don't allow any dissent or any difference of opinions in these territories, then we're not going to have that republic anymore, right? And so the idea is that we return it to the state, where the individuals can elect their local leaders. These are the local leaders in which probably live in their neighborhoods, who they know. And you go and you campaign and you participate in that in that democracy, in that democratic process that we have, which is our great experiment. And if you want a certain policy when it comes to abortion and abortion rights, then get out and advocate it in your state area with your state electorate, and they will pass the laws that are representative of that state and the philosophy that that state wants to choose to have. And that's really what that decision was about.
Yeah.
It was about not mandating from up high, taking 9 individuals to mandate policy that would apply across a country that's vastness we really don't appreciate.
No, we don't. When you think about it, I mean, we have nothing in common with a society like Hungary or Austria or Japan. They're very homogenous with their background and their values, and that's one of our strengths. It really is.
It is
our diversity of opinion and our and race and everything like that.
That's correct.
And it just I really just wish people underappreciate it. Thank you so much for your concrete answer on that, because that's a big issue. But when you release it to the states, apply pressure on your democratically elected person if you didn't like the outcome, right?
And I think one of the things too that and it might have been Justice Roberts in one of the decisions, one of the, and I can't recall which one it is. There was some paragraphs in his decision which I thought made a really good point, and his point was that when 9 individuals, when at your Supreme Court level, up high, U.S. Supreme Court, come down with a mandate, that individuals never got the opportunity, so they mandate a certain thing that individuals never got the ability to go, individual citizens never got the ability to go out to the ballot box and vote for, right? Yeah. They feel cheated of that process, and it will take longer for whatever policy that's been mandated by the U.S. Supreme Court. Of course, they shouldn't be in policy, but I mean, whether it be something like abortion or marriage rights or things of these nature, they do set the tone and policy. And so when you mandate it from up high, people that are against that decision, they feel cheated and slighted. Whereas if it's left to the states and you're going and you're pulling the lever and you're voting, you participated in it. You may not win that election, right? But you know that your voice was heard. You know you had a say in it. I think that to me is a great philosophy and idea that this country, that is the bedrock of the country that allows us to stay together. We may not always win the election, whatever side you're on, right?
Always. In a democracy.
No, we will not. There will be times we win, there will be times we lose. But we got to participate, and you got to be, you went to the ballot box, you exercised your constitutional rights, and you know what? You work harder next time, right?
Yeah.
But at least you don't feel cheated in the outcome, right? And so I think I thought that was a very valid point. Again, I can't remember the opinion he put it in, but I thought, that's a very valid point, and is probably a way to look at the most recent decision in the Dobbs case, So, and I know those are very controversial issues.
Yeah, and they are, but thank you for your just your sound logic, at least explaining, because a lot of folks really don't exactly know because of how certain things were discussed on that. And, last question today, Judge McKenzie, would be, what do you think has been the your best attribute as a leader, or what you would recommend for those that either want to go into the judicial branch or even as a lawyer, because we all serve as leaders, whether we are lawyering as a judge or anything like that. And what's the biggest attribute for success in leadership?
Well, I'll tell you, I think one of the biggest attributes is when you go into, and this too for the military. So one of the best advice that I've ever received. When I was a JAG officer, Judge Advocate General, whenever I served in the Tennessee Army National Guard and was deployed to Iraq in 2009. I always tell people, yes, I was a JAG officer, I served and I wore the uniform, but if it ever got to the place that the only thing between you and the enemy were the attorneys, the war was probably over with, right? Yeah, we're in bad. I served a lot of good men and women who definitely risked a whole lot more than I did,
right.
But in any event, when I was graduating JAG school, which was up in Virginia, I remember there was a sergeant that came to me and was talking to me. And he said, look, you're going to go back to your unit and you're going to have rank on your chest. And they're going to salute you and they're going to call you sir. But you need to understand something, that the individual, the sergeants and those enlisted individuals who you outrank have been doing this longer than you have. And they have more knowledge about how to make things work. And if you're smart, what you'll do is you'll surround yourself with good people who have been there before you and forget about what rank they are and listen to them. And if you'll do that, they're going to respect you more. You're going to be a better leader, and your success is going to be their success. And I think that was wonderful advice. Wonderful advice. And I took that back to even being a prosecutor, right? Because you're a prosecutor and you're dealing with law enforcement. And as a prosecutor, you've got the ability to dismiss a charge that law enforcement bring. But even though you come in there and you come in as a prosecutor with, I guess you could say, some kind of rank there, and that you can make that decision, you better surround yourself with the law enforcement officers that have been in and out of that courtroom, because I bet you they're going to know more about this system than you do as a first-year attorney, right? Yeah. And it's the same as being a judge. So here I am as judge, but I dare say that there's not attorneys that come in that won't have a better handle on certain issues than I do. And so my job is to do the best I can to make the best decision. And sometimes that means listening to the attorneys in front of me that are arguing, because sometimes they're absolutely going to know better than I on a certain issue, right? I think that's the key to leadership.
Humility is on here.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. 100%.
There you have it, folks. Thank you so much for coming in.
Hey, absolutely. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And the only thing I'll add at the end is you mentioned your time as an assistant public defender, and I think your first jury trial was with me.
Yes, it was.
And I think it was a not guilty, was it not?
It was a not guilty. There you have it. I got a not guilty in front of Judge McKenzie in Clay County.
And I'm glad that I was the judge on that. You did an excellent job. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.